Hello and welcome to Gardener's World. Great British summer. Rain, wind, a little bit of sun, but the storms. This garden over recent weeks has taken a real battering, and I'm just doing a little bit of staking. I'm trying to make things look natural but carry it through to the end of the season. I tend to make these over the winter, just bits of steel bar, and we bend them round an old pot, but you can use canes and string. I think the key is trying to stake it so it still looks natural. So things are not stood up straight like soldiers. I've wandered this garden early in the morning, even late at night, and I've had my notebook out constantly, keeping notes as to what's going on, looking for opportunities, what's doing well, what's not. And that's what I'm going to do today. On today's programme, Frances meets a gardener who has defied the British climate to grow all her favourite Thai ingredients.
This one is
loofah.
a loofah. So you're not cooking with this, you're using it. You are cooking with it.
Eating.
You eat the loofah. Because I only know it as something that you grow and you dry and then you use it to wash with.
And Arit finds out what inspired celebrated designer Dan Pearson's most personal garden.
I like the fact you've got to go in here, Dan. I don't know exactly how you're doing that, but, you know.
You have to maintain a limbo quality. Yes.
This, for me, is a time of year when we can really take stock of our gardens. Everything's more or less at full growth. And what I've done is I've paid attention to the border. This was planted 18 months ago. Last year, it did really well. Second year, you start to see where I've made mistakes. But if I look at the positives to start with, you know, the grasses are doing their business, and they will right through the winter months. And I suppose on that note, that's what I'm relying on at the moment. You look at the eryngiums, you know, in one sense they're going over, but they'll hold their form. The little species rose there, the flower's gone, but look at the rose hips, you know, not only fantastic shape, but this lovely, rich black. And again, that's just going to carry on. And even down here, in front of me is Omsomnia, a beautiful plant, good autumn colour. But if you look closely, you've got these fantastic seed pods that ultimately will just start to deepen in colour, you know, and over the next few months, you know, that's going to be glorious. And I think sometimes getting more out of our gardens is just how we look at them. What's lovely about herbaceous plants is you can chop, change them and move them around. And when I set this border up, there was a colour tonage to it. I wanted some whites in here, little pops of purple and maybe a little bit of pink. But I also wanted to use some grey plants. So I've got Artemisia and the old Lambsia. And I wanted to sort of drift those through to create a rhythm, but also to link over to the gravel garden. It's those, for me, that haven't done so well. So what I'm going to do is take these grey plants out and just add a little bit of colour to help us through the next couple of months. So the first thing I've got to do is move this old Lambsia, and I think this is a fantastic plant. So what I'm going to do is containerise it. Get in and just cut the plant back really hard, just so I can start to see the root systems. And what I can do if I containerise it is I can just store it, keep it somewhere safe, grow it on. And what I'll do is I'll keep it in that container right over the winter. There you go, you can see it now. That soil is quite heavy, and I think that's where the problem lies. The next thing is just to start lifting. And all I'm going to do is look for the edge of the root system. I don't want to be too close because I don't want to cut through too many big roots. The root system probably won't be that strong. So it's very likely when I do lift it that it will start to fall apart. So I've already mixed up some compost, and what I've used here is about sort of 4 parts soil, 3 parts peat-free, and then I've put 1 quantity of gravel and then a couple of scoops of sand. So reasonably free draining. If I'm trying to sow a seed or pot up a plant, I always want to know where it grows in the wild. So I'll go back to that original plant, find out where it grows, and then see if I can recreate those soil conditions. So I'm just holding it, but as I'm doing that, I'm just shaking the plant very lightly to make sure they get really good contact. And all that will do now is it'll get watered. What I might do with that finally just over the winter, because especially if it shoots over the next few weeks, is I might just cover the surface in gravel, and then if it does shoot, those leaves are not going to be resting on any compost, just so that not too much damp gets into that plant. I think gardens are ultimately about people, but they're also about personality. But what happens when you get 2 big personalities and they want to create a garden that's special to both of them? Well, we're lucky enough to catch up with broadcaster and DJ Don Letts and his wife Grace as they share their little bit of heaven.
Hi, my name's Don, this is Grace.
And welcome to our little slice of paradise here in northwest London. Luckily, we've got a southeast-facing garden, perfectly positioned for sky views. During lockdown, we've really come to appreciate how lucky we are, although we've not been able to share it with anyone. So this little film is our way to remedy that.
We've been here for about 25 years, and during that time, the garden's been a constantly evolving palette. Other than the lawn, such as it is, 1 rose bush and a small cherry tree, everything here is us. And guided by Gardener's World, it's evolved into an eclectic mix that's all about culture clash. So, from the get-go, there's contrast. I mean, I'm Black British and work with music and film.
And I'm from the States and teach Pilates. And I guess the garden is where we come together.
Well, to a degree, as my punk rock attitude sometimes grates with Grace's more traditional approach.
And it's all reflected in the garden, albeit accidentally.
There's a juxtaposition of textures, colour, form and style, with one side of the garden favouring flowers and the other an assortment of ferns. And it's all peppered with cultural artefacts from our travels around the world. In amongst that, we've created spaces to sit and relax. And to complete the cast, there's Casper and Spook.
We've got small and delicate, we've got big and structural, and we've also got the BFG, the Big Friendly Gunnera.
We got it as a baby in a pot, and it was probably the alien shapes it makes that caught our eye. But this is way before we read labels or tuned into the show.
Anyway, for whatever reason, it ended up where it is now, which is lucky because we had no idea it would grow to be humongous, nor that it's normally found near rivers and lakes. So keeping it satisfied is quite a task, but nevertheless, it's become a much-loved member of our family.
Maintenance-wise, besides water, it's occasionally fed with fish blood and bone meal, and in the winter it's cut back and mulched with its own leaves. And every year it comes back bigger and stronger. So much so we've taken to potting up bits and passing them on. You know, even before lockdown, the garden provided a much-needed retreat from our busy work schedule. And obviously, it's benefited from all the extra care and attention. But then again, we have too.
So if you're lucky enough to have a garden, take some time out to actually enjoy it, because at the end of the day, there's no better way to engage with nature and the planet. And if you don't have a garden, don't dismay. With a bit of imagination, you can create an alternate universe in a window box.
As for advice, well, everything we know comes from watching this show.
It worked for us, it'll work for you.
I think you can see in that garden both Don and Grace's personality, and it's blended together to create a space that you can see they get so much pleasure from. So what I'm going to use in the border here, this old Japanese anemone honorary jubur. Japanese anemones, for me, are a hard-working plant. They're a get-out-of-jail plant. They'll grow in so many conditions. Some people are fearful of them. They think they're quite thuggish in their behaviour, but in the right place, they are a really good worker. And here, you know, there's decent organic matter in this soil. There's a bit of sun, there's semi-shade. You know, at times it can get quite hot, and reverse, you know, it can get quite cold, and these plants will deal with that wonderfully. Start digging my hole, making sure that that's about twice the size of the pot. They'll grow till about probably just over 1 metre. You can see actually already it's just starting to wilt slightly, but it's amazing. I take that out the pot and start to loosen up these roots and give that a really good soaking. Tomorrow morning it'll be sat bolt upright. Work its way in, and then just that good root contact as I'm planting. There we go, nicely firmed in. And I'm leaving a good sort of more or less 2 foot between them, but they'll clump up really quickly. Just finish that round there. And all right, the flower will carry on for another, you know, month, 6 weeks, maybe even longer. But what's lovely is that won't get cut back until next spring. You know, it'll hold a decent form all the way through the winter months. So, the next little beauty I'm going to plant is this, and it's a wood aster, white wood aster, and look at the flower. Incredible. Native America and grows edge of woodlands. But I use it a lot, you know, and it's not just the flower, it's the stem colour. But it's one of those plants that has changed its name. So it's Aster divaricatus to Eurobia divaricata. But it will always be Aster to me. So, the important bit, good sort of moisture retentive soil, semi-shade, or possibly even shady conditions, water in well, and that will be happy. And I really do love this plant. And again, you know, as the flower goes over and it dies, what's lovely is those stems play their part in your scheme. So we put one more in there. And that'll spread probably to, again, just over 1 foot. It'll keep creeping away. But also there's a lovely variation now in those leaf shapes. So, there you go. It's going to give me a colour for the next month or so. Just got to give me some water. Now, we're off to Newbury to meet a lady that has been incredibly thrifty, creating something that can cost an awful lot of money.
My name's Elizabeth, and welcome to my garden. For a really long time, I've wanted my own greenhouse, but budget just wouldn't allow. So this year, I decided I'd make my own.
It's made from structural timber that I had left over from other projects. It's clad in pallet wood, and the windows were all kindly donated by a local glazing company. I planted up wild flowers in front of it because I wanted it to look like it had always been here. During the project, I ran out of timber, so I had to start being a little more creative. I had some nicely seasoned logs and used those to brace the uprights, just to give the structure more strength. The trays for the plants are actually an old garage storage unit, just the shelves. It means I can pop out in the morning, fill them with water, and the plants are happy all day, taking a drink as and when they need it. I've recently been gifted a beautiful little grapevine. At the end of the season, when the wildflowers outside die back, it'll be planted out there, and a small hole made in the pallet wood, the bottom of the greenhouse, and it will trail inside and all around the roof. So we should get a good crop of really tasty sweet grapes. We have a really busy household. So building this greenhouse has not only given me the perfect space to grow my chilies and tomatoes, but also a great place to unwind and relax.
I'm blown away by your greenhouse, Elizabeth. And how satisfying to know that you have created that yourself. There's something quite lovely about late summer rain. There's a freshness about it, but also there's still some warmth in the air. So I don't mind coming out and doing bits in the veg garden. But before we do, I just wanted to show you the leeks, because if you remember, I planted them back in July, and I did it in 2 ways. So the old-fashioned way that my granddad used to do it, just have them as bare roots and, you know, clip the tops off, make the holes, just drop them in and then just leave them. But also I planted them as plug plants. And this variety is called Neptune. But interestingly, I had 2 rows that I did as the bare root, one at this end and one at that. And they are significantly smaller than the ones in the middle. But it'll be interesting over the coming months just to see if that balances itself out, which I wouldn't be at all surprised. So when it comes to the veg, I'll follow the packets and I'll read the books, and I think ultimately our conditions, our environment have changed that much that we can get more out of our veg gardens. And this chard is a prime example. I sow it quite early on, and I've been cutting this literally every sort of 4 or 5 weeks. We've constantly been using it, so I don't let it bolt. We make sure that there's water there. And I have a couple of times just put a little bit of chicken pellet just under there to keep the food going, but it's still looking good. And I do tidy out any real sort of dead leaves, and then things don't rot off as well, so that sort of stuff, we just get rid of it. And where we cut earlier on, it's coming back. So hopefully I'll be cutting that again this Christmas. And I suppose on that note, there's still things that we can keep adding to the veg garden. And this is something that I haven't done before. So these are a spring onion, but they're a hardy version of white Lisbon, so good for autumn planting. And I think go down the garden centre, see what there is available, and it's worth giving something a go. So these come in plugs. But all I'm going to do is just put them in. I'm going to plant them about 10 centimetres apart. I'm not going to need a lot in the way of watering in today. So I think they'll plod on through the winter and I'll get an early spring onion. You probably are gathering that I do like an experiment in the veg garden. And now we've got another chance to catch up with a visit that Francis made to a lady that is working wonders with Asian vegetables.
Here in Somerset is a woman who manages to grow plants, whatever the weather, that would be more at home in the heat of Southeast Asia. Oh, and I'm told they're rather delicious. Originally from North Thailand, near Chiang Mai, Nidhil moved here 26 years ago. Her garden has 2 polytunnels, a greenhouse, and lots of containers, full with exotic vegetables and herbs. What made you decide to grow these kinds of plants in this kind of climate?
When I came here first time, we can't buy Thai ingredient around where we live. I have to go to London to do it. And then I thought, summer here, just like winter in Thailand, because we grow vegetable in Thailand in the winter.
Okay.
So I started from there and to try to grow lemongrass or sort of thing. And they work very well, so that made me, want to do more and more. And I love it as well.
Yeah.
The challenge, when you start this, start that, and they work well.
Well, it sounds like you have a natural ability if you can grow those kinds of things here in a tough climate. So tell me what you have growing here.
Do you know that Kaffir leaf?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've tried to get hold of this. You can only get it dry, really, can't you?
Yeah, you can buy Kaffir fruit sometime in the shop.
Yes.
And then you're collecting the seed to grow from there.
Okay, straight from the fruit.
Yeah, the
Okay.
seed, collecting the seed. And then if you want to grow again, you just cut the stem and you just put in a pot compost and they're growing
So
again.
they take well from cuttings quite easily.
Yeah.
Now, we can't ignore this. What is this?
Snake gourd, long snake gourd.
And what do they
Hold on,
taste like?
please. Tastes close to gourds.
Okay.
But it's not the same.
It feels
yeah.
quite soft, doesn't it? So it's not
Yeah.
like a lot of
Yeah,
gourds.
yeah. When you cook it, quite a lot of water.
Okay.
Quite a
Okay.
lot of water. It's got seed inside now. I
And
think.
quite a big meal.
Yeah. There's one snake for what? For 4 people?
Yeah, do you think four hungry people?
Oh,
That is amazing, isn't it? And this one is
Loofah.
a loofah. I thought so. Okay.
Smoked loofah. Yeah, smoked loofah.
So you're
Yeah.
not cooking with this. You're
Yes.
using it. You are cooking
We
with it.
eating.
You
yeah.
eat the loofah
Yeah.
because I only know it as something that you grow and you dry,
Yeah.
and then you use it to wash with.
We like to cook in stir fries,
Okay.
curries, or boil and dip with chili sauce.
Nice. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Outside, nestled under a verdant banana tree, is a healthy clump of peppery Vietnamese coriander. There are rainbow-coloured chilies and long green aubergines. Your lemongrass is incredible. How many years has that taken to get so big?
No, this is from last year.
Really?
Yeah, I grow them every year.
So you
Yeah.
start with one blade,
Yeah,
stem
one
of
stem.
grass,
Yeah.
propagate from that with...
Soak in a glass of water and keep on windowsill in kitchen. Yeah.
Okay.
And when the weather is warm, we just put in the pot with compost and keep in greenhouse or conservatory.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say in June, July, so I move them out to the garden. I just leave it there until maybe September, November.
And is there a reason why everything is in pots?
Easy to look after, like very cold weather coming. You just,
Move
move
them all
in.
around.
Yeah, so you can move around.
It is
Yeah, you're talking about
amazing.
taking care.
It's intensive care, isn't it?
My baby.
Wow. This is a jungle. This is amazing.
Yes, Thai jungle.
Yeah. Look at your aubergines. They are incredible.
I know, many different aubergine.
How do you grow them so that they're so perfect?
Right, we start from a seed. Of course, we need to look after, and you need to keep the spec like a little bit wider for them.
Yeah.
For the plant have the room, the air growing.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
I think people are often tempted, especially in a small space, to cram it.
Yeah.
But actually, you have so many fruits on each one, and you haven't crammed it. It's very
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah.
Of course, Nid's success at growing all this wonderful Thai veg means she has all the ingredients needed to create all her favourite meals. Today she's cooking with her homegrown snake gourd, along with Thai sweet basil and some chilli. I can't wait to taste it. Try this.
that.
That's lovely. Very refreshing.
And quite healthy to eat as well, and very simple to cook.
But isn't it amazing to think that all this vegetable was just here in your garden in Somerset, and now we're having an amazing Thai dish?
And you can do it.
Absolutely.
You can
Thank
do
you
it.
so much for teaching me how to cook and grow them.
You're
Thank
welcome. Thank you. One more and more and more.
You. Yeah, me too.
Ladies, you've inspired me. Next year, I am going to give one of those loofahs a go in the greenhouse and see how I get on. I think that would be really good fun with the kids. It would be nice to come back to this area as well because Frances helped me plant it. And inspired by that trip she made, she brought home and gave this to me, which is the Vietnamese coriander, which is a persicaria. And I'm also inspired to give this another go because if I'm honest, when I taste it, it still tastes like washing up liquid. and then the heat comes. But I'm presuming if I cook it, it'll be all the better. But this area's done well. All I decided to do was add a little bit of height. So I used the obelisks that I had somewhere else in the garden. And I'm going to grow blackberries up these, which height-wise, that'll be just about right. What has done well is the garlic chives and that lovely society garlic at the front there. But over the coming months, I'm just going to move a few bits and pieces. And remember as well, a lot of these plants don't just have to sit, you know, in a veg garden or a herb garden. These could sit front of border really well. And I'm just tidying back here because this has been a real success, but just got a little bit carried away. Just a little perennial borage. And it's seeded around a bit earlier on in the year, and I lifted some of the plants and put them in containers. But I've decided that I'm going to give this more room and give it that freedom. You know, put it in an area where it can seed around and do its thing. So next couple of weeks, I'll move it somewhere else in the garden. But one last thing that's done really well is the old kale, the old sea kale. I think it looks really comfortable, not only in those conditions, sort of sunny, gravelly, but I think it works well with the colour of the gravel as well. You know, and we used that again earlier on in the year, and it's got a nice flower to it as well. So, all in all, this area's done all right. Still to come, Eric discovers how Dan Pearson has used the surrounding landscape to help create his garden. And we meet Mel Ritchie, who has found a creative and colourful way to make the most of her front garden. But first, who says you need a garden to grow plants? All you need is fresh air.
Herb plants are so different from any other plants that you could be mistaken for believing that they are from another planet. Their entire life is different from another plant. There's no compost, no pot, they don't go in the ground, they're taking everything in through the leaves. They're just a weird plant that's otherworldly. About 10 or 12 years ago, I got my first herb plant, which was a bit of a disaster, but I don't like being defeated. And from there, as you can see behind me, it became a bit of an obsession.
So I used to work in insurance and for many years. So basically working in an office, same four walls every day. And eventually I started to work on a sort of part-time basis for Graham, helping out in his nursery, got me outdoors. Got a bit of a feel for that, started to love it. And then as he moved on to the air plants, I moved with him, and the rest is history, but I love my air plants.
Air plants are known as Tillandsia, that's the proper name for them. They're a member of the bromeliad family, which is the same plant family as the common pineapple. They differ slightly in the respect that Tillandsia are all epiphytic in growth, which means that they take all the water and nutrients in out of the air. Generally speaking, air plants come from Central and Southern America, so mostly Latin America, but some species do extend as far north as the southern states of the USA. There's two basic types of air plants, which most species of Tillandsia can be divided into. You get the mesic type that tend to be from rainforest environments. They have much lusher green leaves because they're used to more humidity and less light. On the other side of the fence, you've got the xeric type of Tillandsia, which tend to be from desert environments, where they're used to a lot of sun beating down on them. So they're the ones with the more silvery leaf, and the silver's caused by little hair-like trichomes up the leaves that help to reflect the sunlight. Unlike most plants, Tillandsia use a specialised form of photosynthesis that's known as crassulacean acid metabolism. What that effectively means is that the plants hold the breath all day. Now, this is to prevent losing moisture through the leaves and through the breathing in the daytime. So while the nighttime temperatures are much cooler, that's when they choose to do all their breathing. As a result of that, Tillandsia are one of the few plants that never breathe out carbon dioxide. This is one of my favourite herb plants, Tillandsia usnioides, better known as Spanish moss or old man's beard. It's prevalent in places like Florida, where you see it growing from trees. A bit of it will get caught on the wind, snag on another tree. Next thing you know, you've a colony of usnioides that can bring trees down because of the sheer weight of it. This is Tillandsia ionantha Mexico. It's one of the easiest plants to grow. Anything with ionantha in the name means it's pretty near bulletproof as plants go. You get that nice red colour which contrasts fantastically with the purple flowers.
Air plants flower, but not many have fragrance. Now this one, Crocata copperpenny, Absolutely beautiful fragrance. Makes it one of my favourites in the nursery. And when this one is in flower, quite often on a nice sunny day, you can smell it throughout the greenhouse. Keeping air plants at home is actually really easy and probably one of the easiest houseplants you could have. They don't need an awful lot of care. They will stand a bit of neglect, and they'll always tell you if they need a bit more water, because you might get a bit of browning at the end of the leaves, or the leaves might start to curl in on themselves. So they're telling you that they need a little bit more water. You can use a spray bottle and just mist the plant perhaps once a week. And it could also, say perhaps you've got your air plant in a terrarium and you don't want to get that bowl wet, whatever, take the plant out, put it in a bowl of water for about an hour, let it soak up what it wants, then let it drain out thoroughly and bob it back in your bowl, and there you are. Use perhaps bottled water or rainwater, because you want to watch out for hard water, because that can actually damage the plants because of the metals in the water. Air plants can be put literally anywhere in your house, but as long as they get some natural light. But what they don't want is the full direct sunlight. That can actually damage and scorch the plants. If you were to put an air plant in compost or any kind of soil or whatever, because that's damp and wet, what will happen is the air plant itself will start to rot, and it will unfortunately kill the air plant. So it wants to be sat in a dry environment.
We feed all our plants once a month. We use a foliar feed, which means that the feed is in contact with the leaf of the plant. It's important with an air plant feed to make sure that you get the right kind of feed. Most plant feeds contain a high level of urea as the nitrogen source. So when you're looking for a feed, just look for that statement on the bottle, contains no urea. A decent Tillandsia feed or a decent orchid feed is perfectly adequate. We dilute it down, spray it on once a month, job done.
When I look at the air plants, especially the ones we have here, I think they just give you so much joy. They always give you a smile.
I was out the other morning with a cup of tea and I'm creating that terrace for Mrs. Frost, which is that circular idea, and I want to repeat it somewhere, and maybe it pops up different places in the garden. And it was the bottom of that mulberry that started me thinking that if I could repeat that pattern through here in some form at a certain time of year, there would be a connection. And you can see the canes that are spotted about at the moment. Don't worry, I will take them out when you're gone, because I know they haven't got caps on. But it just gives you an idea. I'm going to have these perfect circles, and they're going to be full of irises and crocus. So first of all I'm doing is just using the bulb planter and just creating a series of holes all the way through. But to create my perfect circle, what I'm doing is using just this central pin. And I've got my string. You imagine I'm just going to move this as we start making holes all the way around, and that will just create the circle. But you don't need one of these. You could lift the whole area of turf, you could use a little trowel, but I think this is just an interesting way of playing with your spring bulbs. Well, the first one I'm going for is not a bulb, it's a corm. So this is crocus and it's called Ruby Giant, which is slightly misleading because it's not ruby and I don't think it's really a giant, but it's actually quite a purpley colour. I've dug these holes out to just shy of 6 inches, and the crocus don't want that. So I'm just going to break up the end of this little sort of nugget of soil and take this to about 3 inches. Just sit that in and just put that back over. What's good as well is these don't really need any watering in. And it really is that simple. I think we worry a lot about planting bulbs in our lawns because people think they're slightly untidy. We can't cut the lawn until the bulbs die back. And yeah, you can't. You should leave it at least, you know, a good 6 weeks. Let that goodness go back into the bulb. The next one that I'm going to work with is iris. And this is Iris reticulata Pauline. A rich, purple, sort of sort of velvety feel to it. And again, for me, it's a plant that's not that intrusive, i.e. it doesn't leave much behind, you know, when it's finished flowering. So I love naturalising them. You get people that sort of don't manage to get them flowering the second year. And a lot of that really is because of depth of planting. And these really do want to be a good, I don't know, 4 inches, even up to 6 inches. And they love really free draining soil. If I show you my soil really closely, the drainage in there is really good. I can even see sand particles in there. So I'm not worried too much about the drainage. And if you are, you could drop just a little bit of gravel in the bottom of the hole, something like that. But these are going down to the full distance. I'm making sure my little pointy bit is sticking upwards, and just work those back in. I think what I like about this idea is, I suppose, being semi-controlling. You know, is it's perfect circles, but they sit within quite a natural, relaxed space. And I know that your eye will just get drawn all the way around, you know, just this pop, 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 and it will bring that element of surprise. So I think come next spring, you know, this really will have a little bit of wow about it. We've got a chance now to see another one of our home films from your garden. And this one's from a lady called Mel Ritchie. And you might just say her gardening ideas are a load of rubbish.
Hello, I'm Mel, and this is my front garden. We have a lot of beans. So a way that we decided to try to maximise the planting space was to build our bin shed. The frame is built using treated timber that's safe to use outdoors, and then we've given it a lick of paint using a fence paint. As the planters are shallow, and also because it gets very hot out here, we've used plants that are happy in the heat. So we have sedums, which creep over the bin shed really quickly, and sempervivums, which are in flower just at the moment. And we also have different times and some saxifrage.
We only made the bin shed last year, and already it's filled out really well. If there's a small gap, like there is here for example, the best way to fill it quickly is to break off a bit of sedum and pop it into the gap like this, and it will soon root in.
Our bin shed has totally transformed the front garden, and it really makes good use of what would otherwise be wasted space. So if you fancy a project this summer, why not make a bin shed?
Mel, I thought that was cracking. It really was. And I've seen it done on top of shed roofs, and even sometimes with the troughs a little bit deeper, planting up herb gardens. But I think also what you've proved is just a little bit of thought we can add green to maybe the less beautiful things in our gardens. But gardens are very personal things, aren't they? I know, you know, creating for clients or at shows is very different to what I do here at home. And Eric was lucky enough to catch up with top garden designer Dan Pearson at his home.
Dan Pearson has been creating gardens around the world for over 30 years and has received his fair share of accolades and RHS Chelsea awards. He has a reputation for designing naturalistic spaces where the garden sits comfortably within the landscape. But all of Dan's creations are composed so that nature in all of its forms are as much at home as the people it's designed for. Dan's invited me to a private garden set in farmland with rolling hills beyond. But it's not for a client, it's just for himself. You moved out of London to come back to the countryside. What was the drive behind that?
Well, I'm from the country originally in Hampshire, and I'd been living in London, and I'd gardened every single inch of that garden. And I just wanted to feel like I was a much smaller part in a bigger environment.
Right. And I love the fact that as I look out, I just see all the undulations of the hillsides and the trees. And actually, if I'm honest, I don't know where your garden starts and finishes.
This is what I wanted to achieve, so it's great to hear that, because the landscape is the ultimate driver for this. I didn't want it to feel that there was a beginning or an end, because the garden and the landscape are completely interlinked.
Mm-hmm.
And those blurred boundaries for me are really interesting.
Yeah, you're trying to have that invitation of the landscape coming toward the garden.
Absolutely. So all that we see in the far distance contributes to the near distance.
Before Dan even started designing the garden, he wanted to understand the conditions of the site, which is on a very steep hillside. Did you find the conditions of this site a challenge or something to really embrace?
Well, both. It's an exposed site. We're windy and we're southwest facing, so it's blazing sunshine when the sun's out.
Right.
First few years I was here was really very much about finding the right plant for the right place here and making sure that I wasn't competing with the environment, so that I was gardening with things that were suitable for here. The little ark of plants that I brought with me from the Peckham garden, 3 carfuls, sat here on the hill, and they'd had this very easygoing life in London, you know, and they came here and thought, what the hell have you done? And they tell you very quickly that these conditions are different, and you have to work out why, and then how you mitigate for that. It was 5 years I spent before we actually started the garden.
That's a commitment of time, isn't it? It's not a case of just coming to the site, overlaying a plan and looking up in the book, sunny plant, sunny place. That really is an intense process.
It is, and one of the amazing things about gardening, I think, is the continuity or the process. And the process is often the very best bit. It's not the end result. So for me, because I've always gardened, you know, you're in process with gardening and finding out where you make your mistakes and finding out where your successes are is just as good as then putting the final thing together.
He started by putting in a vegetable and ornamental herb garden, and once he was happy with his plant choices, he could develop the rest of the space, creating terraces which follow the contours of the hillside and wildflower meadows. As you would look out from your house, what was that view that you wanted to experience?
So my first impression of this place was that it was all about the view. And I didn't want for there to be an immediately obvious garden here. So I brought the landscape right up to the front of the house.
It's that sensitivity of the land, isn't it? It's really observing what's around you.
Allowing yourself to try and understand what a sense of place is at the very beginning is really key.
Here there is a clear context. How can we achieve this in a smaller space?
I think it's just about letting your eye travel and roam a little bit first, and your surroundings, wherever you are, even in an urban situation, are often really interesting. And you can borrow your neighbour's tree. It doesn't have to be yours to contribute to your garden. And the way the aspect of a garden lies, that's going to give you some clues as to how that space should feel, whether it's west facing and the light comes in the end of the day, or east facing or the morning. Those things are really informative in terms of how you might then plant the garden.
Okay, there's no excuse then, is what you're saying.
No, exactly. But it's all about just keeping on looking and feeling what it's telling you.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to hear how Dan has spent so much time experimenting and trialling plants for this site before he even decided where they were going to actually go. And I guess we gardeners can take something from that it is okay to experiment and know that sometimes we are going to get things wrong. The key to it is just take time. I absolutely love this section.
The meadows really drive the aesthetic of the garden, so there's a seamlessness between the two. And what I'm doing is emulating the quality of those meadows and also the way they function together. So in here, for instance, I've brought in cultivated plants that feel very much like the things you'll find in the meadows, like this Scabiousa ochroluca, or some of the grasses that you'll find are just rising through here. So there's this quality of the land coming into the garden and the garden stepping into the land. But the other thing that's most important really is that all these plants share a liking for the same conditions. And once you choose the plants that are all happy in the same place, then you can start to play with them as a composition. And then I've got other plants which come through in layers amongst these key players so that you get one thing superseding the next, as you might in a meadow.
This border is alive. I'm seeing so much activity. And again, that's part of those observations of nature, is it?
The biodiversity has just exploded because we're doing something that's improving the environment through gardening it.
And then as I'm looking out, I can see, with the scabious, because it's nice and floaty and bouncy, your eye just can start to float off.
Travel through it.
Yeah. But things like the self-seeders, how do you manage those?
The self-seeders can really start to take over, so they tend to cut those down just before they seed.
Right.
And I'll sacrifice their winter seed heads.
I like the fact you've got to go in here, Dan. I don't know exactly how you're doing that, but,
You have to maintain a limber quality. Yes.
Looking back at the garden, it's just a gentle haze in the distance. This is a grand-scale garden, but there's something that we can all learn from. First of all, understand the site, get to know the soil, get to know what aspect we're facing. And also, as well, our plants, what we absolutely love, so that we can bring in the right plants for the right place that are going to thrive in our conditions. The final ingredient, patience. If we can learn to slow down and watch the process of growth within our gardens, we will create a truly beautiful space.
I don't know about you, but Dan's garden, absolutely cracking. I love the way that he's constantly looking to nature to influence what's going on in the garden. But I thought one of the real key points to come out of that was that even in, an urban space, a smaller garden, a town, whatever, most of our gardens are not created in isolation. There's a lovely little tree down the end there, which is a quince, and I've got a load of trees behind a wall at the end of the garden. And the moment I put the quince in, it connected with the trees that sat the other side of the wall and just brought them right into the space. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to add a tree, and they're the one thing I think about more than anything else I add to the garden. Because when you think about it, yeah, you're planting for the here and now, but also you could well be planting for another generation. The first thing that I need to work out is the shape. What do I want it to do? And it might be to maybe block a bad view. It might be to create some dapple shade at the end of the garden. And here, it's to fill a void that's up there. It's also to help bring this big U down into this space. So it works a bit like a layer system. The next thing I'm thinking about is root requirements. And then the final thing before I worry about the ornamental bits is how is it going to affect the light? So, when I put it in, it will be tiny, but what's it going to be like in 10 years' time? How will that affect the ground underneath? And that again is why so many of our gardens evolve and change, because we change the environment by adding trees. All right, now have a look at this beauty. Colereteria paniculata, or golden rain tree. Absolutely stunning. You can buy it here like I have as a single stem, but you can get it as a multi-stem. It'll grow up to about 10 metres. I love the leaf. Beautiful sort of red centre, gives you slightly sort of wisteria feel to it, really good yellow, earlier flower, followed by these beautiful little lanterns, and then fantastic autumn colour. And then when it comes to prepping, plant all the trees in square holes. If you imagine you're planting a tree and you're in a really heavy clay soil, and you just make your hole just slightly bigger than your tree, you plant the tree, and in reality, your roots are gonna hit the edge of that hole and just keep going round, which means that tree probably won't anchor itself properly, you know, to the ground. Then after that, I'm always making sure that the hole's about twice the size of the pot. And then depth-wise, I never want to plant trees too deep, and especially larger stock. You know, if you're planting a larger tree, I more or less leave it slightly proud of the soil level, because what will happen in time is it will settle and the roots will get poured in. So if we check that now, height-wise, that's not bad at all. When you're buying trees, ultimately there's three ways. So containerised, then you've got bare root, and then you've got root board. This is containerised, which means actually I can buy and plant it any time of the year. But you imagine you plant this in midsummer, it's going to need a lot more TLC than if you plant it in the middle of October. One of the reasons that we're planting today is there's really good moisture in this ground, but also there's good moisture in the air in the evening and in the morning, so you know that actually fantastic time of year just to settle this tree in before it deals with the winter. Then after you've got your containerised, you've then got your root board and your bare roots, and they're exactly what you think. If you think a root board is lifted out of the ground and wrapped up in hessian and you buy it that way, whereas a bare root comes and you can see all its root system. Those we tend to buy through the winter months, right through from November to basically the end of March. With both of those, you get a lot more for your money. But I would say if you've never planted a tree before, having the leaves on is not a bad way to understand that tree. So the next thing we're going to do is just tap that out. And if you look at that root system, you've got some fantastic white fibrous root. And that, again, is the key to your tree being successful. So I'm going to loosen these off very, very carefully. I don't want to damage too much. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to offer it back in the hole. That's just probably slightly proud of the soil around it, which will do me. So I'm going to start to push back in. It's all about that root contact. I know the soil that I'm putting back is fine. It's got a good amount of organic matter. I'm not going to add any more because I don't want to make it too easy for this tree. I do want it to work a little bit. And the quicker that it establishes its roots, you know, the safer it becomes. The next thing, I'm just going to firm it round, but not jump, just firm it very carefully with the back of my heel. And what will really settle the soil around that tree. So the next thing is staking. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to work this probably about 45 degrees away from the root ball and across the plant. If you imagine, you know, you set your stake up, you know, to your prevailing wind, so the tree sits the other side of it. You don't want the tree bending over it. So most of my prevailing wind comes from just behind me. So then, stake goes in. And all this is a round wooden tree stake. Treated piece of timber, you know, it'll last forever. But then saying that, this tree probably, you know, 2-3 years down the road won't need that anymore and it can come out. I've got a couple of inches basically between the tree. Don't want this stake rubbing up next to the tree. So next thing I want to do is use a rubber tie to sort of fix the tree to the stake. I mean, you'll see lots of different forms of these. You might see them with a little buckle and a little plastic nugget that sits between the tree and the post. That's the key. With this one, it literally simply rubs around the tree and then we're going back round the post. And what I do is I just tend to put a little tack in and that will stop my tie from sliding up and down. So all I've got to do now is have a bit of a tidy up and water that in, and when we go into next spring, this tree is already going to be in a happy place. And now it's the final one of our films from your homes. And you think you've got pest problems in your garden, you wait until you see what this couple are dealing with from Solihull.
Hi everyone, my name's Richard, and my wife Diane, who's the real gardener of the family, meticulously trims our box hedges every year into neat and tidy shapes. However, just a few days after she completed this laborious task this year, we looked out to see dishevelled hedges, anything but neat and tidy. So we decided to find out what was going on, and this is what we found. You've taught us all about box blight, but have you got a cure for fox blight?
That really did make me giggle. I'm sorry, Richard and Diane. I don't have a solution for your fox blight. But to take your mind off your woes, here's a few jobs for the weekend. It's getting a bit late to sow veg, but there's still time to get a few radishes on the go. They're incredibly easy and can be grown in a pot. Simply fill the container with peat-free compost, give it a good watering and allow it to drain. Sprinkle the seed over the surface, then cover with a fine layer of compost. Keep well watered, and within a few weeks you'll have some nice crunchy radishes to eat with your salad. Plums develop their best flavour when left to ripen on the tree. If they feel soft, they're ready to pick. I inherited this tree with a garden, so I don't know which variety it is, but I can assure you they taste incredible. If you have any tender perennials you want to keep for next year, now's a good time to take cuttings. Select non-flowering stems and using a sharp knife cut just below a leaf node and remove lower leaves. With bigger leaf plants, it's also worth cutting some of the upper leaves in half. Insert into a pot or a modular tray filled with compost. I'm using a 50-50 mix of perlite and peat-free compost to ensure good drainage. Water well and allow to drain before placing somewhere warm and light. That's nearly it from myself and Ash, who's now come to join us. For me, gardens ultimately are about people. They're about you creating a space that puts a smile on your face. Go and create whatever it is that makes you happy. I think as well it's the constant change and the editing that for me makes gardening so fascinating. So over the next few weeks, I'm going to make the most of the warmth in the soil and the moisture in the air. Monty will be back next week at Longmeadow at 8 o'clock. In the meantime, look after yourselves.